Thank you for the intro. I'm Sanath. I'm a software engineer on the AWS Serverless organization. I lead the developer tools initiatives, and I build tools to help developers be more successful and productive when creating serverless applications. A brief background about me: I started designing computer processors and then worked on the Windows kernel and slowly graduated up the stack to building web services at a bunch of startups and most recently at Amazon. In 2016, I joined the AWS Lambda team when the service was just a few months old. I worked on the inner guts of the service, which is most of the distributed systems are, and then I quickly found my passion with developer tools. There's a perception about serverless that you need a lot of new fancy tools to be productive building serverless applications. And this fascinated me. My journey since 2016, my goal since 2016 has been to understand this, build tools when it is absolutely necessary, and actually tell people how they can go serverless with the existing tools that they have. And so in this talk, we're going to talk about how you can take your knowledge about building applications on the cloud and transfer them to building serverless applications. And in the process, you will learn a tool or two about how you can use tools to go through this journey. Quick show of hands, how many of you have built serverless applications? OK, cool, not a lot. So just a quick recap on what serverless is so everybody's on the same page. It is a technology that allows you to run applications without provisioning or managing servers. Obviously, as everybody has done the joke, I need to do it again. There are servers behind it. Your application will scale based on the traffic you get. Let's say you build a hobby app, and tomorrow it gets on Product Hunt, and it gets super large traffic. You can still sleep at night and not worry about the traffic because the service will scale your application for you. You never pay for the idle cost, so you can have your application created, and if nobody's using it, you're not being charged for it. And your application is highly available and fault tolerant, which are amazing characteristics for a large-scale production application to be. And so you can go from a prototype to production with the same technology, all supported for you. There is a lot of variety of use cases where serverless is a great fit. Almost any type of workload can be run on serverless. We have the iRobots of the world that have built the IoT backend. We have FINRA that have processed billions of transactions a day, financial transactions a day on AWS Lambda. We have customers that have built IT automation workloads, process large-scale data on serverless, built web backends, and even support AI ML type workloads like chatbots and Amazon Alexa. So what is a serverless application? At the crux of it is your business logic. And that's the only thing you should think about when you're building a serverless application. Your business logic runs on a compute, say AWS Lambda. Your business logic is being invoked by an event source, which could be an API endpoint. So when somebody goes to your website on your browser, you make an API call from the browser, and that invokes your business logic. Your business logic talks to a bunch of downstream services, say a database or another service, does some processing and returns the data back. Very standard architecture, just like how you know and have built web applications. So that's serverless. Now, where you can run your serverless application. Here's the landscape of platforms, tools, and providers that Cloud Native Computing Foundation has compiled on where you can run your serverless application, what frameworks and tools can help you be more productive there. Cloud Native Computing Foundation is a vendor-neutral home for some of the largest projects on GitHub, like Kubernetes, Prometheus, et cetera. They have a working group focused on serverless, and they've compiled this landscape. Cool. Now that we're all on the same page about what a serverless application is and where you can run them, let us talk about how you can nail the application development. All right, how many of you have built web applications? It's a lot more number than serverless. Great. Now let's talk about how to build a standard web application that's going to production. This is my web app that has a backend, it has a database, and your front end, right? Cool. I first start writing my code, obviously. You grab coffee, sit in front of your computer, put your headphones on, and start writing code, right? Cool. Once you've written your code, if you're using a compiled language like Golang or Java, you compile it, and you test your application locally. In the case of a web app, you open up your browser, type in localhost, start going to your website and start navigating it, right? You go through this dev, compile, test workflow a bunch of times until you've built enough business logic that you find it comfortable pushing to a development environment where you can test in an environment that is very similar to your production. Once you've tested there, you send out a code review for your team. Hopefully, you do code reviews. It's a good practice. And then get that committed to your repo. And at some point down in the future, it gets deployed to prod. Hopefully, you're not crossing your fingers and doing a manual deployment. Hopefully, you have a CI/CD pipeline that can take you through different beta, gamma, prod environments, run automated tests against it, and deploy to production. So how do you build your web application? Write your code, test it locally, test it on the cloud, commit to a repo, get it to production. Awesome. Is everybody on the same page with this? Is this how you build applications? Cool. I see a bunch of heads nodding, so I take that for yes. Now answer me this question. How do you build serverless applications? You write your code, compile it, test it locally, push it to a development environment, test it there, commit to a repo after code reviews, and deploy to production. Yes, your development workflow is no different. Wait, but I read Medium blogs that said serverless is going to dramatically change the way I build software. Shocking news, serverless is not going to change the way you build software. You're going to continue building software the same way you were before. And let me, I've been through this, I've been on serverless since 2016, and I've seen a ton of tools come to market that have helped customers build serverless applications. And on the one hand, I've seen enterprise customers like T-Mobile build their own frameworks to support their serverless development. And on the other hand, I've seen enterprise customers that go to production without any tools. What does this mean? Do we really need special tools to build on serverless? The answer is, you can get started on serverless with the tools that you already have. But a serverless-specific tool will make you way more productive and efficient. I'm going to describe how that works with an example. So going back to our building web app example. Now, we're building web app. Let's talk about the components of the web app. So it's a standard backend, front end, and a database web app. Let's compare and contrast how you would do it on non-serverless platform versus a serverless platform, right? And the web app has my application code that I need to write. This is my JavaScript file or Go file or Java file. And I need to define the infrastructure that my application needs. So these are the services that run on the cloud for you. So for example, if you're running in Lambda, I need to define a Lambda function. I need to define my API endpoints. I need to define my database, all these infrastructures that I need. But let's first focus on the application code. In a non-serverless world, let's say containers, or you're running on EC2, all you would need is a mean stack. So you have your MongoDB for database, you have your Node.js and Express for your backend, and you have Angular for your front end. In serverless, you can still run your mean stack. You can actually take the code that you've built elsewhere and lift and shift to serverless by adding compatibility converters. So these are libraries that let you take code that you've built elsewhere and run it on a serverless platform like AWS Lambda using libraries such as AWS Serverless Express. So this lets you run an Express application on top of Lambda. Now what you've done, you've not changed anything about how you build applications. You've actually taken your existing application and moved to serverless. This is just the first step. Now once you've experimented with the serverless platform, let's say this is a proof of concept. Once you've experimented with the serverless platform, you can go dive deep and learn the serverless programming model, which in the case of Lambda is literally a function, which we call the handler. And this function gives you this is an extra function you add to your code that gives you nice properties such as immutable code, statelessness, and event-driven. These are great architectural patterns for your application to have, and you get them by just the virtue of running it on Lambda. I'm not going to go into details of the architectural patterns, but the gist of it is focus on your business logic. Get that right first, and use tools to help you run them on serverless. And once you get mature, once you get comfortable with actually using the platform, you can go dive deep. Serverless is easy to get started with the tools that you already know and love. Awesome. Let's look at the infrastructure part of it. So by infrastructure, I mean provisioning the resources in the cloud. And as other people have pointed out before in the sessions, there are several tools such as Terraform or CloudFormation that you might be already using today to provision the resources in the cloud. Awesome. How do you do it? How do you provision serverless resources in the cloud? You can use Terraform. You can use CloudFormation. These tools are just as powerful and capable of provisioning your serverless workload on the cloud. If you want more specialization, there are serverless-specific tools like AWS SAM, serverless frameworks, Apex, Sparta that Matt just talked about a few minutes back. And there are many other frameworks that are specific for serverless. They add a level of simplification for you for provisioning serverless applications. You don't need them if you just want to get started with serverless. But if you want to have a powerful framework that simplifies your workflow, you can opt into those. Say hello to Sam. This is a squirrel that I built. No, I built a framework called AWS SAM. It's called Serverless Application Model. It's a shameless plug. I'm just going to talk about it for a quick second because I think it illustrates a point. It also gets my plug across. So with SAM, you define your application in a YAML or JSON configuration. So you write 10 to 15 lines of configuration that you pass to SAM. It goes, creates resources in the cloud for you. In this case, this went in and created a Lambda function, an API endpoint, connected them together, set the right amount of permissions on top of it, so you don't have to actually create the permissions yourself. And now you have an application that you can actually use. This dramatically simplified my workflow as compared to, let's say, 100 lines of CloudFormation. That doesn't mean CloudFormation is bad. It means CloudFormation is more powerful, it's more lower level. It gives you all the bells and whistles you need. But SAM is built for serverless applications. So if you want to focus just on serverless, and if you have the time to invest in another tool, it's awesome. You can use SAM for it. SAM comes with an open source. It's an open source tool set. It comes with a companion CLI that you can download to quickly get started, up and running, and build, package, and deploy your applications to the cloud. It's integrated with the whole AWS CI/CD ecosystem, so you can use code pipeline and code build, and you will have a production-ready infrastructure for you within minutes. Again, you don't need to start with a tool that is specific for serverless. If you're already using Terraform or CloudFormation, try to understand the serverless platform. Try to understand how you build applications on serverless first by just using those tools. And then invest and understand the right tool to use for your need. A serverless-specific tool will definitely make you way more productive than a general purpose one. Let's talk about build. This is the part where you actually, you've written your business logic, you've written your application infrastructure. You need to build this application to be deployable. It could be just as a matter of compiling it, or it could be bundling it for a specific architecture. So you have your application code, you have your manifest declaring all the dependencies, you have your build tool, and you get a deployment bundle. This is probably a jar or a Docker file that gets uploaded to whatever service you're deploying to. In serverless, you still have your code, you still have your dependencies. You still have the same build tool, probably the same build tool that you used in the other world, but you can add a plugin that will help you create a deployment bundle specific for serverless. Right? This hasn't dramatically changed your workflow, but it enabled you to quickly get started with serverless. For example, if you're using Java and Maven, it is as simple as adding a new plugin called Shade plugin, which will create what we call a fat jar that you can deploy to Lambda. And this fat jar contains your code and along with all your dependencies. So if you are getting started with serverless, your current build tool might already support building for serverless. You don't have to invest in finding the right tool for your job. You can get started with it There's no blockers to getting started, but a serverless-specific tool, if you're using JavaScript, it can probably do more things for you than just your basic building tools. Now, testing locally. This is where Chase highlighted this morning about testing applications. Serverless applications is a big question. How do you do them is always a question that I've heard from customers. And in particular, customers have told me that, hey, I know how to build my application. I know how to deploy it to the cloud. I know how to run it there. But how do I test it locally? Like, I need to be confident about my code before I push it to the cloud. In the non-serverless world, you would obviously run maybe your node server locally, and then go to your browser and test it. You would definitely test it with unit tests, which you can run anywhere, and integration tests. The workflow remains the same with serverless, but if you are running serverless applications, you can use a tool like SAM CLI to simulate cloud resources onto your local computer. These tools allow you to kind of run your application just as how it would run on the cloud, using a fake or a simulated environment. SAM CLI can run a Lambda function, an API endpoint locally. Local Stack, for example, can run more applications locally. These give you an opportunity to run your application manually with a slightly higher fidelity, a closer fidelity to the cloud. But it is no substitute for complete integration testing on the cloud. If you're worried about local testing, if you're worried about getting started on serverless with local testing, it is completely possible. Use a tool that can give you the right fidelity for you on your local computer and run it there. Testing on the dev cluster is super easy. But serverless, as everybody mentioned, you don't pay for the idle cost, so you only pay for when you use these applications. So in the non-serverless world, you would probably spin up a dev cluster, and maybe one team has one dev cluster, or maybe an organization has just one development cluster that they use, because these clusters cost money to spin up and maintain. In the serverless world, you can have as many developer stacks as you want, as each developer has, because you don't pay for creating the stack, or you don't pay for creating the environment. You only pay for when you use it. So testing on a dev cluster would be create your dev stack. Each developer could have a stack, and then you run your integration tests against it. Now, what this enabled us through this process is get very good confidence in the application we built. And we got this confidence without investing upfront on finding the right tools. The tools that you might already have today can help you get quickly started with serverless. And it can, and then once you complete the journey, you can invest in finding the right tool for your product. And once you have confidence in your logic, you come into your repo, get a code review, just big gung-ho code review, and then you deploy to production. And if you're using a pipeline today, maybe using Jenkins or Code Pipeline or CodeBull or Circle CI, any of the CI/CD frameworks out there, the workflow would look like you build your code, you package it up, you run your test, and then you deploy to multiple environments. This goes through beta, gamma, or prod environments, running automated tests in the process, and gets deployed. Shocking news, with serverless, the workflow is exactly the same. And the fun part is the pipelines that you've used before could actually be reused with serverless. You might have to change a command or two. For example, you might need, if you're using SAM CLI, you will need the SAM deploy command to deploy this serverless application to your environment, beta, gamma, or prod. But the knowledge you've built or the investment you've had in building these pipelines out, with best practices like manual approvals, baking in verification steps in the process, having time blockers for when you cannot deploy, auditing and compliance mechanisms built into the pipeline, all of that remains the same. You just have to tweak your blueprints to use a different command, and now you can actually build it on serverless. So if you came to this talk to learn new tools to get started with serverless, I'm sorry to say that your existing tools will just work fine. If you're especially getting started with serverless, I would encourage you to first invest in your business logic, because that is the differentiated part of your application. Serverless is the easy part. You can start with the tools that you already use, find plugins to help you kind of make the leap from your current tool to actually deploying on serverless. Once you have a proof of concept out, once you know and understand the platform better, invest in the right serverless tool for your job. These tools, serverless-specific ones, will make you way more productive, but it doesn't mean you need them from day one. Focus on building good software you can easily build on serverless. Thank you.